Good morning. I hope everyone had a good weekend, and I hope everyone is ready for the 2 days of class this week before we head off for Easter break. Today, I'm going to take a look at the second element of ordinary grace. I think we'll still be just a tad behind going into break, and then I'll catch up with the lectures after break, and we'll just kind of keep moving from there. I think that before we do it, like usual, I just want to do a quick preview. Remember that the book review has been assigned. It should be posted on D2L. If it isn't, please shoot me an email and I'll make sure I get it up there. But we'll begin on, today is March 29th and 31st. We're supposed to be to page 163. Group A, you're in class then. When we get back, Group B on on Wednesday the 7th, and Group A on Friday the 9th. We'll pick up full weeks and pick up the writing lab groups the week after this. As we're dealing with ordinary grace, I think sometimes it's important to put a label to things. And in this case, we're going to call it a Bildungsroman. If you look at the definition, it says it is a coming-of-age novel in which a person achieves a level of psychological, spiritual, or moral maturity. And I think what we're talking about is the idea of coming of age. In the United States, it seems to me that we have several spots of coming of age. We hit a certain age when we leave home and go to kindergarten. Then that turning into a teenager, high school graduation, college graduation. Sometimes before high school graduation, it's getting that driver's license, depending on what state you live in. Then usually it's getting married. I'm not sure if there's any other kind of growth ceremony until one gets to the funeral. But I think Bildungsroman is the idea of the coming of age novel. It's the one that happens, in that teenage year, adolescent time frame of one's life. And what's going to happen is we're going to have the character, in this case Frank, leave a state of innocence and through experiences start moving towards being an adult, gaining some wisdom through the awful grace of God that we talked about last presentation, and moving slowly towards adulthood. The innocence. We can see that at the frosty root beer in front of the drugstore. We can see it when they're playing catch. We can see the innocence through little statements about his favorite holiday that we'll get to in the subsequent chapters. Through all sorts of things, we're going to see tons of innocence. The novel began with a death. The novel began with bailing a drunk out of jail. But throughout this, there's these little pieces of innocence that we're going to run into. At the same time, we have the nostalgia that combines with the innocence. And for me, this nostalgia rings true. When I was a little kid, we had TV trays, and we would sit on the couch or in a chair and have the TV trays, and we would watch TV if it was a special occasion. My parents were stricter than the parents here. We only watched special occasions. It was not every Sunday night. But I can identify with watching The Wonderful World of Color on black and white TV. I'm going to play the YouTube video in class. I'll leave a link in the description box. But watching something that's supposed to be in color and black and white loses a lot. And then the idea of watching the Ed Sullivan Show. And again, remember, the Ed Sullivan Show was a show that would not show Elvis below the waist because he swayed his hips too much. It was a big deal when the Beatles made the Ed Sullivan Show because rock and roll was risky. There's a lot of innocence on the Walt Disney Wonderful World of Color. There was a lot of innocence on the Ed Sullivan Show. For me, there's a lot of nostalgia. For the narrator, looking back, there was a lot of nostalgia. However, there was tons of experience. While the boys were having a frosty mug of root beer at the front of the drugstore, we had folks day drinking in the back of the drugstore. We have what we would call the homeless now versus the hobos and bums. We have the dead man. We have discussions of war and PTSD. We have lies. We have domestic abuse. All of those things are experiences that move Frank, that move Jake, that move these young characters from their innocence into a state of experience, and that state of experience gets them to adulthood. I think innocence versus experience is embodied in the character of Ariel. We have her in the innocent line as a very pretty girl, but we also have her born with a cleft lip. We have a scar that's still visible. And anytime we start seeing scars in literature, I think it's important to understand that we're talking about experience. It's experience that leaves those scars. The mother, Ruth, had declared Ariel the joy of her heart, tons of innocence. But even in that, the hope for the consummation of my mother's unfulfilled longings. Embodied in Ariel is, for Ruth, the fact that Ariel can go do something that Ruth never could. Embodied in Ariel is the idea that there was failure. And once again, failure, like scars, are all about experience. Ariel was sweet. She would track the small successes better than the parents. And then she gives them adult grown-up advice. You'll be lots of places in your life that you're not supposed to be. Just don't get caught. Small successes, love and tracking and being a mom as a big sister seems pretty innocent. Don't get caught. Smacks of experience. Ariel embodies the innocence versus experience, and that's going to happen throughout this novel. We'll see it in a lot of spots in this novel. And Ariel also, I think, illustrates experience when she says, you'll have plenty of time to become responsible, and believe me, it's not all it's cracked up to be. You know, when I was a kid growing up, and I expect your parents probably did the same thing. Don't be don't be in such a hurry to grow up. You'll have plenty of time to grow up. Enjoy what's happening now. Ariel, in some ways, is doing what we talked about at the previous slide. She's acting like a mom. But I've talked before about being curious. Why would a character make this statement? What experience does it illustrate? How does it illustrate an end to innocence? As you're reading, I think it's important to be curious as we go through this book. Also, I think innocence versus experience is in the very language of this book. Grain elevators rose beside the tracks in the flats. Tall and white, they were connected by catwalks and conveyor belts. There was a stark kind of beauty in the way they stood against the sky like sculptures made of bones. Next to them ran a siding where the hopper cars were rolled so they could be filled with grain. But that afternoon, the rails were empty and the elevators deserted. Grain elevators, tall and white, connected by catwalks and conveyor belts. It's just a basic description. I think there's innocence. On the flats, The poor part of town, the working class part of town, leads to experience. The term stark leads to experience. Sculptures made of bones leads to experience. The siding where the hopper cars were rolled and they were filled with grain, there's optimism, there's innocence, versus being empty and deserted, the idea of experience. That contrast is in the descriptive language of the place. And again, please remember, those of you who did not grow up in small town America, small town Midwest America, the most important thing in that small town is the grain elevator. It's the tallest structure. It's the structure that provides the economic benefit to the small towns. It's key to a small town. And there are two things that small towns don't want to lose. Well, probably three: a bank, a school, and the grain elevator. And again, we have the same sort of thing when we're describing the church. They had a small congregation that included a number of Protestants of different denominations who had no church of their own near enough to attend easily and preferred the more informal service of the Methodists to the religious rigor of the Lutherans, who were as ubiquitous in Minnesota as ragweed. I think one of the things we'll just talk about is point of view and verisimilitude. Lutherans who are as ubiquitous in Minnesota as ragweed. I think if you take a look at that statement, first of all, if you do a quick Google search, currently Minnesota has more Catholics than Lutherans. At the same time, we have the Garrison Keillor thing where we're dealing with all the jokes about the Lutherans and the Unitarians and whatever all else. We have this idea of Minnesota where you have Ole and Lena, and you have the sing-song sort of voice, and you have Lutherans and hot dish. Whether it's accurate or not, I think that sentence gives us a reminder of what people's perceptions are of Minnesota and the idea of innocence again. But you also have this dichotomy, a strong congregation. But you have people, no church of their own, near enough to attend easily. If it's such a strong congregation, if the congregants are so strong, why didn't they do the work to attend the church of their own? They preferred the more informal service of the Methodists as opposed to the religious rigor of the Lutherans. One of the things that I think is important here as you read is to look at the dichotomies and what are the work that those dichotomies do. There's a certain doubt we have to take a look at. How strong was this congregation? If they didn't like rigor, if they only wanted the things that they could do easily, how strong was it? Simple words still have meaning. And I think it's important as you're reading to, even with the simple terms, what's the opposite? How are those opposites played out? The other thing, I love this book. My mother-in-law loves this book. And in fact, I am very, very tempted with whatever papers you do with the book review. I might just send them all to her and have her take a look to see whether you're accurate about it. Okay? But one of the weaknesses of this book is ever so often, in an effort to build suspense, I think Kruger may get too heavy-handed. And the next would be the most painful to bear. Okay, I got you. Bad stuff's going to happen. Remember that foreshadowing should be hints and not statements that beat the reader over the head. It builds some suspense, but it may be a little too heavy-handed. And as readers, I think those are judgment calls that each reader gets to make individually. Character, conflict, connection, and theme. It's what I've talked about time after time after time. It's what I'm going to continue to talk about in this novel and in The Trail of Lightning. Ruth gives us a good view of herself. I thought I was marrying a lawyer, which means she thought she was marrying somebody with high social standing, somebody who was going to have a lot of money, somebody who could run for the state legislature, somebody who could run for governor. She didn't sign on for a Lutheran minister. And Nathan, at the same time, I don't know what I can do except pray. She seems to have a lot of strength. I think she appreciates the efforts when he does practical things. All right? When he tries to intervene on the behalf of the abused woman, she's going to say thank you. But notice it's thank you for trying. And perhaps I've been too influenced by Star Wars about there is no try, only do. I think Ruth, in some ways, is of that same sort of thing. She appreciates the effort, but she wants more. She expects the lawyer to be able to do more than the minister. And again, remember, she was in her Ayn Rand phrase. She was, not necessarily looking for spiritual solutions. She was looking for the capitalist, for the money, for the power. And so I think as you look at Ruth and as the character develops, it's important to remember those sorts of things and how the character reveals herself through statements like this. And again, this ties into some of the things we talked about, the wife not appreciating the husband in the previous slides, in the previous chapters. Nathan, I think it's important to remember, comes from commonplace roots. He had great ambitions. He was the first one to go to college. He wanted to be an attorney. He was whip smart and cocksure. And then the war changed him. And that change was a dramatic change from being a litigator to being a pastor, from being somebody who wanted to win at all costs to somebody who had much lower ambition as far as the world was concerned, as far as making money was concerned. And so he goes from minister to pastor. And again, the war is one of the underlying currents here. How war changed people, how war altered people, whether it's Nathan, whether it's Gus, whether it's the other characters in this novel. And there'll be little statements about it all the way through that we'll just kind of keep picking up, as if baseball is, kind of the soundtrack, war is an underlying current that I think has gotten a hold of the characters and won't let them go. And then finally, as we get through this thing, I've talked several times about read for layers. So we've got layers added in chapter 8. We've got a mystery. Warren is Danny's uncle. He's got Bobby's glasses. Why? We've got the social division brought home because of the grandfather's wealth. We've got family divisions. We have family counseling. We have Ruth versus Liz. We have Warren versus the family. We have all sorts of questions about these family divisions. And in character, we have divisions, Gus versus Doyle. And we also have in chapter 8 a reminder that Nathan is more aware than Frank thinks, than the readers may have believed. And so I think we just need to take a look at how that's part of it. I'm pretty sure that I forgot to make the slide for the daily writing. So for today, the daily writing is very, very simple. Give me a one-sentence statement about what you think about the book so far, what you think about the characters so far. One-sentence statement. That's all we need. I'll hope to see you in class on Wednesday.